Paul, thanks again for being with us. I want to ask you about biblical masculinity. The idea of biblical masculinity is disappearing in today's culture, and yet we see that it is so important as we look at the scripture.
Yes.
Talk to me about biblical masculinity and why it's so important.
Well, first of all, there is a difference between a man and a woman. I know that in today that's shocking, but Paul told the Corinthians, act like men. There had to be a basis for that. But here's what we need to understand. Let's say that my father's generation, and for the most part my generation, the idea of being a man was John Wayne. Okay? And if you watch some of the John Wayne movies, there was a lot of things noble about that, but there were a lot of things that weren't noble. So John Wayne and that type of thing isn't the model, the archetype of what a man is to be. And then if you go to the other extreme, which you seem to find today, it's the very opposite of that person, a very passive, delicate man, a fearful man. It's like his psyche is broken and he just crumbles. Part of that we need to realize is one aspect of the judgment of God. Isaiah 3 is very clear about that we have young men ruling over older men. Noble men are removed from society. And there's all sorts of things revealed there in Isaiah 3. What we've got to realize is this. Our main problem is simply, again, not studying the Bible. Our main problem is not looking at Christ, or looking at Christ through some filtered lens rather than the raw scripture. My desire is not to be like John Wayne. It's also not to be like the other extreme. I want to set my sights on being like Jesus Christ. Now, also, I need to think about something. There is a headship in the family, and I am to be the head of my home. That doesn't mean that everything revolves around me. My headship serves one purpose, that I lead my home for the benefit of my wife and children, no matter how costly it is to me. My headship is sacrificial. And one of the things about being a true man, if we look at the model of Christ, it is self-giving and self-sacrifice. It's always, look at what Christ did. He gave himself and gave himself and gave himself until there was nothing left to give. That is my responsibility to my wife and my children. Also, if you want to talk about Christ is our protector, he stood in front of us. He stood in front of his bride. Anyone wants to come to get his bride, anyone wants to come to get God's children, he's going to stand between them and the ones he loves. This requires strength, courage. I think that young men need to grow in character, number one. And the primary characteristic should be love, which is self-giving. This is not about me. It doesn't matter how much I hurt, doesn't matter how much I suffer, doesn't matter if my expectations aren't met, my needs aren't met, my wants aren't met. That's not what it's about. It's about me dying for a woman and my children. Serving, giving, and stop looking in the mirror and stop being self-absorbed, self-giving. But then there's some practical things also. It's my job to feed my family. And it doesn't matter, like in the rougher times when Heartcry was first starting out, working construction, doing all these different things, hours a day, coming home at night, whatever I had to do to put food on the table. That's my job. If someone's going to stand in the door and going to hurt my family, it's my job to stand in the door. It's my job to take the brunt of everything this world has to throw at my wife and my family. And so, I was we raised Charolais cattle and quarter horses. So, it was rodeo from the word go. And my dad would just, you're going to be tough.
Yeah.
If you don't die, you're going to be tough. My sons were raised by a preacher.
Yeah.
And they were homeschooled, so they weren't knocking about in football or rugby or this or that. And so I had to create scenarios, physical scenarios for them. I made them work from the time they were little. They lifted weights. They learned how to fight. They did all these things because that's part of, when my sons marry, I expect them to do everything they have to do and be everything they have to be to protect that woman that they've married and to protect their children. And so there's all kinds of things that go into that. And we have to realize that, we want to know that there's a noble and righteous government. We want to know that all these things are in place to protect us. But the responsibility I have is above all those other things, to care for a wife. I told my boys, I said, let me look at your hands. Are there any calluses on your hands? All right, I'm going to work you. And that's what we did.
Yeah.
We did. So I created scenarios to make them tough. I didn't have much time for the outdoors because of my hectic schedule, but I made time so they'd be